Welcome to the Resilience Series. I'm Stephanie Weaver, author of the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which is available for pre-order now and has a theme of resilience. My guest today is Allison Hong Merrill. Allison is an award-winning writer who writes in both English and Chinese, and her memoir, 99 Fire Hoops, debuted last year. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It's such a great honor to be here.
It's great to see you. So let's begin with where you grew up in Taiwan. What was life like for you there?
Thank you so much for the question. So I was born and raised in Taiwan. As a child, I grew up in a household where my parents, or the other adults in my family, were self-proclaimed Buddhists. And so growing up in that faith tradition, I didn't know any better. I didn't know there were anything else, any other religions existed in the world. But my family, the adults in my family, they were not practicing Buddhists. They were just self-proclaimed. So they were not necessarily spiritual. I happened to be the kind of child who I was really, really curious about spirituality at a very young age. But the culture, the Chinese culture, or rather the Taiwanese culture that I grew up in, did not really value girls or women as much as it values men and boys. So I had questions, and I took my questions to my parents and asked them about life and death. And I was about 7 years old at this time. They would just dismiss me and never gave me any satisfying answer. So I was always confused. And the word confused was just one of the things that I would use to describe my childhood growing up in Taiwan. Is I was confused. I didn't know why boys were more valuable or more precious than girls. And why is it that when I had questions about life and death, I was considered a troubled child who tormented her parents, right? And there were domestic abuses in my family. I did not know that was bad. I only thought, oh, everybody's family was like this, right? Until I started school and I started to observing my friends, and I went to my friend's house to play after school, and I was shocked to find that their parents were loving and were caring, and that's something that was new to me. And I thought, well, why is it that I was not treated that way in my own home? And of course, I could not take the question to my parents because, in my past experience, my questions were not important.
Right.
And I should just be quiet and be obedient and wait for adults to give me permission to speak. And that's basically the tradition that I grew up in. Is you're a girl or you're a woman, your job or your life's calling is to sit quietly in a corner and you wait for permission from men to tell you when you can speak. And most of the time when men spoke to you was commands. They would tell you to go and do dishes and tell you to go and cook and tell you to go and clean and tell you to go and do other things. So that's when you were being spoken to. That's when you had the opportunity to respond to human interactions, right? And so that's how I grew up in.
Yeah.
And so not very ideal.
So set the scene a little bit more for people who are watching. Did you grow up in a small village, a big city, in a suburb? Tell us what the home was like and kind of a little bit more about how you were treated by your family, because I think it's really important to understand the rest of your story for people to know that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I grew up in the fishing village. My childhood home was across from the beach, the Pacific Ocean. And so our front yard was the beach, was the ocean. And that was like, now I think about, oh, that was like very idyllic, very ideal vacation destination. Like all the homes on the street, on my childhood home on the same street, all of them have been renovated, remodeled, and turned into Airbnbs because that was like a very, very hot vacation destination. But back in the days when I was a child, it was a slum. All my neighbors were uneducated, and I don't want to say low class, but I lived among fishermen, and fishermen back then, they didn't have education, and they were laborers, and they had certain habits that were, now we would call them out for being abusive. They would go and abuse neighborhood girls, because these fishermen, they would go out to sea on fishing trips, and they will be gone for weeks, for months. And when they came back, they will want to have human companionship. But that costs money. That would cost them money. And they were not wealthy people. We live in a slum, right? We all live in poverty. And so these fishermen will have some hard candies, right? And they would go to the neighborhood girls and offer hard candy and ask these girls to go to their rooms and play doctor with them. And my mother, she was, at the time, my mother wasn't the best mom in the world. Like, we all have weaknesses and shortcomings. My mother wasn't a very nurturing type of mother. And she would leave me and my sister home alone all the time. But she will also warn us to not interact with any fishermen in the neighborhood. And she will not tell us why. She would just tell us, well, you're not allowed to go and play with the fishermen. And we, why would we play with old men? But now I know, because from other girls in the neighborhood, we heard from their experiences that was what happened to them, right? And so that's the kind of neighborhood I grew up in. My parents did not get along. They didn't have a good marriage relationship. And so they fought all the time. Every time they fought, my mother, she lived with a packed suitcase. She was always ready to lead my dad. And when she had a fight with my dad would beat her, physically hurt her. And she would leave. She would take her suitcase and she would leave for weeks, for days, she would just be gone. And so my sister and I, we would, when my mother was gone and my father had to go to work during the day, I gave myself, this is the self-imposed job, that I thought my job as a child was to raise my sister as a child, right? I thought that I had to provide for her. I had to protect her. And so I would take her out to the street and look for food. And how do you find food on the street? If not, because we didn't have money. And so I would take her to our neighbors for lunch. And the neighbors would, some of the neighborhood women were very kind, and they would take care of us and raise us in a way, but not really happily, because when my mother came home, they would come and attack my mother and say, where did you go? How come your kids were like orphans and they stunk, and all this and this. And so that's kind of the neighborhood and the childhood surroundings and environment that I grew up in. And again, it's not ideal.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important, and you talk about it really beautifully in your book. It's a life of many hardships. And so, but the kind of the light that arrived in your life were some people that started to show you kindness. So I wanted you to be able to talk about those folks that you met.
Yes. So even though they were, my parents were not caring, they were not loving, but there were kind people in my life when I was growing up. And the earliest memory I had of somebody being kind to me and my sister were my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, my mother's parents. So, and now I know, now as an adult, I think back, I understand why is it that my mother always went back to her parents, because her parents were loving, caring people. And so my grandparents, they were the kind of people who would not dismiss my question. So I would go and ask them questions, and they would answer my questions the way that I would understand as a child. And they were patient, and they spend time with me. My grandmother never received any formal education, so she was illiterate. She was not the kind of grandmother who could sit in a rocking chair and read storybooks to me or to my sister. She couldn't read. And so she never gave me the gift of literacy, but she gave me the gift of time and attention. And I think time and attention together make the gift of love. Mm-hmm. So I feel loved when I went to my grandparents' house. And so they were the first people who made me feel special, or I was needed, I was wanted, I was important to them. And then I grew older, I found the same kind of feeling of love through this senior couple who served their mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Taiwan. They were from Utah, America, and they were assigned to serve their mission in Taiwan, and they served in my hometown, and they were the Bushmans. And the Bushmans, they treated me and everybody else, not just me. I wasn't like the special chosen one. No, they were kind to everyone. But to me, I feel special. I feel that I was the chosen one, because all the other people in my life did not treat me that way. So when somebody started to treat me like I have value, that I matter, then I feel I was special, right? And so it was the Bushmans who reminded me of the same kind of love that I felt when I was at my grandparents. So when my parents divorced when I was 14 years old, in my parents' divorce agreement, my father has sole custody over me and my sisters, and my mother has zero visitation rights. So my father told us children that we were not allowed to visit my mother or my mother's side of the family. So that's when I did not have a chance to continue to go back and visit my grandparents anymore. And that's when that love was sort of, it just ended, right? Artificially by men. Because my father is a man and he was in charge of us. And in the society, I should always obey him. And so when he said I couldn't go, then I couldn't go. And so that love with my grandparents ended, but then I was able to continue feeling special and needed and loved through the Bushmans.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating because I've read other memoirs or stories that are very critical of missionaries coming, especially from the US to Asia, and sort of, imposing those concepts. I mean, certainly was part of colonialism as well. In your experience, it was a completely different, it really changed your life in a hugely positive way. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So I know that there were missionaries from America, from other Western countries who went to Taiwan to serve the people there. And they were from various sects of Christian churches, right? And as a child, I've heard other adults sharing their experiences, and it's very interesting. There were positive and there were negative experiences from different people, depending on who you talk to. And most of the people in Taiwan, or the people I've heard about their experiences, they will call these missionaries clothes, like your clothing and food parents, meaning these are the kind of, metaphorically, they're parents who provide food and clothes to the people, but nothing else, right? They want you to be baptized. They want to convert you so they can maybe have a statistics of how successful their missionary work was in Taiwan. And so people were like, well, these missionaries, they didn't truly love the people. They just wanted you to include you in their fold so they could report to their authority, to their boss or whoever was in charge of sending them to Taiwan, to say, hey, look at me, I did such a great job, I'm a wonderful missionary, give me a raise, like that, right? And but the missionaries I have encountered with, I had interacted with in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they did not act the way or behave the way that will make me think they were my clothes and food parents. But instead, I felt genuine love from these people. And now I think, of course, I would not go and ask them, hey, tell me, why is it that you don't make me feel like you're my, clothes and food parents? I never asked them that question, but my guess is that they had a true testimony of the Lord Jesus Christ and his gospel, and they truly understand their mission. Like, why is it that they were sent to Taiwan to serve the people? Because of the love. They wanted to represent the Lord and the Lord's love for the people. So they serve for that purpose. And so, of course, it will not come out as, hey, we're keeping stats so that we can report to our boss like that.
Yes. So how did you come to the United States? Because that's part of the story that you tell in this book, and the Bushmans were a part of that story.
Yes. So when I was 19 years old, I was a college student in Taipei, and I met this missionary from our church on the street. And this missionary, at the time, he was 20 years old, and he was from Texas. He was close to the end of his mission. So these missionaries, they served for 2 years, and then after their service, they returned home. They could resume their regular activities. They could go back to school. They could get married and get a job. Just continue on with life. And so this missionary, and I gave him a name, a pseudonym in my memoir, and I call him Cameron. So Cameron was a missionary. I met him on the street. And the first time I saw him, and this is such a cliche to say, it was love at first sight. It truly was that case for me, that I saw him and I was like, oh, was that love? Was that lust? The thing is, I was never allowed to have any romantic relationship with any boys. When I was in junior high, when I was in high school, I had crushes on boys, but was never allowed. It was that kind of crushes were suppressed by authority, meaning by school, by teachers, by parents, because Asian students, our only job was to study hard, to do really well in school, to be number one in your class, and then pass all the tests to go to college. So they didn't want us to have any kind of romantic relationship with boys, to do that. So when I was a college student, I was 19, and I saw Cameron. I was like, hey, I'm free to love anyone, right? Because I have done all the work that men told me to do, and I already arrived at the college student status. So now I can free to love anyone. And so I had never had any romantic relationship with anyone, like I said. So I didn't know, I wasn't sure if that was true love or if it was lust. And saying lust is probably a very heavy, serious word. It was just like, hey, do you just like his looks without knowing the kind of person he is? So to me, that's sort of like lust, right? So anyway, I loved him. I thought I did. I was 19. I was a teenager. My brain was not fully developed yet. And so I thought, oh, that's my true love. He's my true love. But he was a missionary, and he had to abide by the church rule that he could not have any romantic relationship during his service as a missionary. So I didn't, and I knew that. So we did not have any inappropriate relationship together. But we stayed in touch after he returned home from his mission. And after he returned home, I went on a mission. I served a mission as well. But we were pen pals. And this is back in the early 1990s. So this was in 1994. And there was no email at the time. So we wrote to each other the snail mail style. And it was exciting for me at the time. It's like, oh, I got a mail. Stephanie, do you remember those days?
Oh my gosh. I had complete romances via mail and letters, and you're just waiting for the next one. And did he enclose a poem or a drawing or something? Or
Yeah,
yeah, so it's I think for younger people, there's a missing piece that they'll never know what that was like. But
right,
yeah, and I think you can really build up the person into who you think they are or who you want them to be, and not really know who they are because you're not dealing with them face to face.
right.
So let's jump ahead just a little bit. There's a scene in your book that's pretty harrowing. It's how the book opens when this your first husband Cameron leaves you alone. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, of course. So Cameron and I, we wrote to each other. And then after my mission, he wrote to me and said he was going to come to visit me in Taiwan. So I'm like, oh, can't wait. So he came and I went to the airport to pick him up. He came out and he pulled out this diamond ring from his cargo pants pocket. He pulled it out and just put it on my finger. Okay, I had no idea what that meant. That was how naive I was. I didn't know what that meant. And then I was engaged. Like 1 second I wasn't. The next second I was engaged to this guy. Well, I didn't, I did not protest. I did not fight back because I liked him. And so we were engaged, and then he helped me to get he helped me to apply for the same university that he was attending at the time, and I got a scholarship to go to that school. So that's how I came to America. And then we got married. Cameron and I, we got married 10 days after I arrived in the US. Our marriage was so horrible. We fought all the time. We were just, because we never dated. We got married first, and then we started dating. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, he's not the person I would want to marry, but I was already married to him. So I thought, well, the next best thing to do is to just find good things in him to love him, right? Because in my mind at the time, I thought our marriage was going to last forever, like literally forever. And I thought, well, if I did not like him now, how am I going to live with him forever? So I'm like, oh, I had to work on, being more patient. And maybe he didn't like me because my English was bad and he was impatient with that. So I'm like, I have things I need to work on. And, we can just work together and make this work. Well, it didn't work. So 16 months into our marriage, one day I went home to our apartment, and before I left my apartment, Cameron was there. He was doing his homework on our bed. And 2 hours later, I came back. The door was unlocked. Of course, it would be unlocked because I was thinking he was still home. Why would he lock the door, right? So I opened the door and it was dark inside. So I reached over to the light switch to turn on the lights, but the lights would not turn on. Like I turned the switch on and off, and the light did not work. And I thought, wait a second, what is going on? So I went in and it was so dark, right? This was a November night, dinner time, a little bit after dinner time. So I felt my way into our bedroom, and he wasn't there, and nothing else was there except the bed. He left the bed, but everything else he moved away. He moved with him. He moved the furniture with him, and he was gone. And there was no utilities. There was no gas, no electricity, no telephone. He took the phone. And so I had no way of calling for help. And even if I could call for help, my English was so bad at the time, I could not really call for help. And so that was the opening of my memoir. I was suddenly thrown into this unexpected, horrible, horrible situation that in a million years, I would never have imagined myself being in there. I mean, talking about my childhood, it was horrible. That moment in our apartment in Texas, it was off the chart horrible because I was alone, right?
What do you think saved you in that situation?
There is this story I always remember. So I've heard of the story of a blind man who summited Mount Everest. And that was no great feat, even for people who could see. And so after he did it, people interviewed him and asked him how he did it. And he said, oh, because I can't see, I don't know the scale of challenge it is to go up there, because he can't see it, right? And so he said, so I wasn't afraid, because you can see the challenge in front of you. I can't see it. So I have the freedom to imagine what's in front of me, right? And so he said, all I did was I made sure that one of my feet is in front of the other. And I just keep on keeping on. Basically, that's not his direct, that's not a direct quote. It's me paraphrasing. But basically what he was saying is, okay, there was a challenge in front of me. There was a mountain I had to climb, but to climb the tallest mountain in the whole world, all I had to do is to make sure that one of my feet is in front of the other, and just keep doing that. Eventually I got there. And I've been abandoned by the person I love, by the person I trusted, by the person I was most intimate with in the whole world. We were intimate. And that kind of betrayal was just unthinkable. And now I'm like, okay, I have to get myself out of this situation. But how do I do that? I had to make sure that I make one right choice. That's what my one step. And then after that step, I take another step. That's another right choice I had to make. I had to keep making that right choice one after another, to walk away from the situation, to go to where I wanted to be. Because I do have the choice. I can choose to cry, and I cried. I chose to cry, but I can also choose to be strong and be brave after I cried. And so that is how I got out. I think
I'm going to interrupt you because I want people to read your book. So we're not going to tell you how Allison got out of this terrible situation because we want you to read the book because it's really incredible. So I'm just going to go to the next question that I have, which I think is an absolute segue. Love and kindness are two qualities that you talk about and live on a daily basis. You're a person who this is the first time we've ever talked, and yet you send your emails to me saying that you love me. And I know you mean it. Like it's a really beautiful, genuine aspect of you. How do you think you escaped being a bitter person after all that happened to you, your childhood hardships, and then this really emotionally abusive marriage, and then being abandoned, and someone who you were wholly dependent on? How did you turn out to be this loving person that you are today?
Oh, thank you so much, first of all, Stephanie, for being so kind and so loving. You're a great example to me. And so I want to thank you for being a role model for me. And to answer your question, I like to do this exercise. Nobody told me I had to do it, but I just like to do it. I like to do this imaginary interview with the people who have hurt me in my life. So I will do an interview, and it's all in my head. I didn't actually reach out to these people, because some of these people who have hurt me in the past, I don't know how to contact them, right? So an example is I would do an imaginary interview with Cameron. And in my head, I will be like what we're doing right now, you and me. We're having a heart-to-heart talk, right? And because this whole interview is imaginary, so I have no way of knowing exactly it in the real world what Cameron would have said to me. I don't know what he would say if I asked him, hey, Cameron, tell me, why did you do the things you did? And why did you say the things you said? I don't know what his answers would be. So I have the entire world of freedom to imagine what the answers would be. And I did this interview in my head several times, and I come to the conclusion that we are all imperfect human beings living in the fallen world, and we all have weaknesses, shortcomings, and we all make mistakes. And when I position myself in that perspective to think, oh, Cameron is just like me, we all screw up sometimes, right? And it's best to assume that he was doing his best, and the other person was doing his best, and the other person was doing his best. to free me, to free myself from hatred, from the bondage of hurt feelings, and to offer them instead the gift of love, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, because those are the same kind of gifts I will want people to offer me when I fall short, because I do fall short, right? And so when I messed up and people offer me forgiveness and kindness and love, I would be like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best, right? And that's precious. That's a precious gift. And we can give that gift. So that's how I sort of not fall into a bitter mood all the time, because that's not a great way to live.
That's true. This is why, everyone, I wanted to talk to Allison, because this is who she is, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful lesson for all of us. Allison, how do you define resilience?
I think resilience is a person's ability to bounce back from adversity, to, let me see, I have a little note here, to recover from misfortune, and to adjust to changes, and to adapt to emotional challenges with courage. And so it's almost like if you have this object that you bend out of its original shape, and this object has this ability to go back to its original form, that's resilience. And I think we all have that ability to do the same, to come back, to become even better after a trial, after tribulation, after challenges, because we are capable of so much more than just being bitter and depressed and give up.
That's a beautiful answer. So, my last question for everyone, it's my last question for you, is tell us about your self-care resilience strategies. How do you take care of yourself?
So I have this practice, another practice, not the interview. Every morning I get up and I get on my knees. I kneel for 30 minutes in prayers. I talk to my Heavenly Father. I talk to God. And this is not, again, nobody told me I had to do this. I don't have to report to anyone, but I want to talk to Heavenly Father, talk to God. And because some people might know my relationship with my earthly father, my biological father here on earth, hasn't always been ideal, but Heavenly Father, my God to me, is my spiritual anchor. And I feel like I can go to him and I can tell him anything. And that's probably some people do in real life, that they have that kind of father that they can go to. And so I have, and God is not my imaginary friend. I want to emphasize that. To me, he feels real. And when I talk to him and I tell him everything, it's like I unburden myself to him. And he is so loving, he's so caring, that he takes my burden. And then he said, I hear you, and I know what you're dealing with. I know your struggles. I know the challenges you're facing, and I will bless you with courage. I'll bless you with faith, and I will bless you in every way for you to continue to go on. And life has, see, my challenges did not disappear because I pray to God every day. It didn't. My challenges are still there, but I become stronger and I have more faith, and I believe in myself that I can do this, because I know that behind me, and nobody can see it, he's right there. He's behind me and he's holding me up, right? Uplifting me. And that is the blessing and the gift that I give to myself, is to build that relationship with God, to go to him every day. And that's how I establish that daily self-care routine. It has worked for me. I know that everybody has to find a way that works for him or for herself. And this is the way that works for me.
That's great, Allison. Thank you so much for that answer. I love asking the question because it's always a different answer. And Allison, thank you again for being here today and sharing your story. Please visit AllisonHongMerrill.com to learn more about her upcoming classes, and you can order her book, 99 Fire Hoops, wherever you like to buy books. And we do encourage you to use independent bookstores when you can, and you will understand the title of the story after reading it. Check out other episodes of the Resilience series on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Follow me at SWeaverMPH to learn more about my upcoming book, The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which is due out this summer and is available for pre-order now. Thanks so much for watching.